Frederick William O'Connell was an Irish clergyman, translator and scholar. Born in Newtown in the County Galway in 1876, the son of William Morgan O'Connell and Catherine Donnelly. He studied at Trinity College Dublin and was ordained in 1902. In 1905 he married Helen Young, and the couple would have 3 sons. In 1909 he became the lecturer of Celtic languages at Queen's University in Belfast. Shortly thereafter he would pen his A Grammar of Old Irish. In 1925 his first wife died of tuberculosis. After her death he would marry Marcella Graham. He was, among other things, a voice on 2RN, the first Irish radio station. He was struck and killed by a bus in 1929. As a writer, he mostly dealt with the Irish language, including translations of works like The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Don Quixote into Irish. His 1924 The Fatal Move and Other Stories appears to be his only collection of short fiction. The title story reeks of a Gothic atmosphere. A crazed chess player encases his romantic rival in a metal chair and has him play on an electrified chessboard, where 2 random pieces and a series of squares on the board were arranged such that these 2 touching would result in the unlucky player's being roasted in his chair. A very intriguing idea, but O'Connell barely devotes any time to the actual game, perhaps due to not being a great chess player himself. It's all sadly over before it properly begins. W.C. Morrow would have handled this premise better, though he'd probably have both characters fried to a crisp due to a freak accident. The Vengeance of the Dead is a brainless affair where a Hindu man argues with his Muslim neighbor, hypnotizes him and causes his death, and is then killed shortly after a seance where the dead man raps out his name. The Fiend That Walks Behind is another short affair that, in more competent hands, could have been handled well. A physician who stole the work of his deceased colleague and claimed it as his own contracts the same paranoia that his friend wrote about, namely the utter dread of someone, or something, always following behind his back. The whole thing is presented in a bit of a heavy-handed way, and the main character commits suicide before much really happens. The homing bone has a physician purloin a femur from a pile of bones in a demolished cemetery, only to dream that a pair of skeletons barge into his room at night with their femurless comrade inside of a coffin, and then again with a coffin bearing the physician's name. Then when that silliness is past, the doctor lies down, but then he hears rapping on his door, and then someone opens the door of his room, and then leaves. Oh, what an M.R. James could have done with this basic idea instead. In Professor Danvers's disappearance, Professor Danvers apparently disappears by pretending to be his own guest, leaving behind his clothes as if he disappeared from them supernaturally, presented in the dry tone of an ex-detective. The rejuvenation of Ivan Smithovich is the weirdest part of the whole collection, and not in the way we like around these parts. It takes place in some unexplained possible future England, which was taken over by Russians who suppressed the English language so that only 6 people, one of them the title character, can speak it. In order to stop it from dying out, he has monkey glands grafted onto his frame and becomes mentally regressed to the state of an ape. Written from the perspective of a somewhat bitter Irishman dealing with the preservation of his own native language, but too brief, lacking in any details, and culminating in a most undignified and silly finale. I can see why O'Connell stuck to translating other people's fiction rather than writing very much of his own.